Mark Twain. To be continued. North American Review. No, D.C. October 5, 1906. Chapters from My Autobiography, Roman 3. By Mark Twain. Chapter 6. Tomorrow will be the 36th anniversary of our marriage. My wife passed from this life 1 year and 8 months ago, in Florence, Italy, after an unbroken illness of 22 months' duration. I saw her first in the form of an ivory miniature in her brother Charlie's stateroom in the steamer, Quaker City, in the Bay of Smyrna, in the summer of 1867, when she was in her 22nd year. I saw her in the flesh for the first time in New York in the following December. She was slender and beautiful and girlish, and she was both girl and woman. She remained both girl and woman to the last day of her life. Under a grave and gentle exterior burned inextinguishable fires of sympathy, energy, devotion, enthusiasm, and absolutely limitless affection. She was always frail in body, and she lived upon her spirit, whose hopefulness and courage were indestructible. Perfect truth, perfect honesty, perfect candor were qualities of her character which were born with her. Her judgments of people and things were sure and accurate. Her intuitions almost never deceived her. In her judgments of the characters and acts of both friends and strangers, there was always room for charity, and this charity never failed. I have compared and contrasted her with hundreds of persons, and my conviction remains that hers was the most perfect character I have ever met. And I may add that she was the most winningly dignified person I have ever known. Her character and disposition were of the sort that not only invites worship, but commands it. No servant ever left her service who deserved to remain in it. And, as she could choose with a glance of her eye, the servants she selected did in almost all cases deserve to remain, and they did remain. She was always cheerful, and she was always able to communicate her cheerfulness to others. During the 9 years that we spent in poverty and debt, she was always able to reason me out of my despairs, and find a bright side to the clouds, and make me see it. In all that time, I never knew her to utter a word of regret concerning our altered circumstances, nor did I ever know her children to do the like. For she had taught them, and they drew their fortitude from her. The love which she bestowed upon those whom she loved took the form of worship, and in that form it was returned by relatives, friends, and the servants of her household. It was a strange combination which wrought into one individual, so to speak, by marriage, her disposition and character and mine. She poured out her prodigal affections in kisses and caresses, and in a vocabulary of endearments whose profusion was always an astonishment to me. I was born reserved as to endearments of speech and caresses, and hers broke upon me as the summer waves break upon Gibraltar. I was reared in that atmosphere of reserve. As I have already said in another chapter, I never knew a member of my father's family to kiss another member of it except once, and that at a deathbed. And our village was not a kissing community. The kissing and caressing ended with courtship, along with the deadly piano playing of that day. She had the heart-free laugh of a girl. It came seldom, but when it broke upon the ear it was as inspiring as music. I heard it for the last time when she had been occupying her sickbed for more than a year, and I made a written note of it at the time, a note not to be repeated. Tomorrow will be the 36th anniversary. We were married in her father's house in Elmira, New York, and went next day, by special train, to Buffalo, along with the whole Langdon family, and with the Beechers and the Twichells, who had solemnized the marriage. We were to live in Buffalo, where I was to be one of the editors of the Buffalo Express, and a part owner of the paper. I knew nothing about Buffalo, but I had made my household arrangements there through a friend, by letter. I had instructed him to find a boarding house of as respectable a character as my light salary as editor would command. We were received at about 9 o'clock at the station in Buffalo, and were put into several sleighs and driven all over America, as it seemed to me. For, apparently, we turned all the corners in the town and followed all the streets there were, I scolding freely, and characterizing that friend of mine in very uncomplimentary words for securing a boarding house that apparently had no definite locality. But there was a conspiracy, and my bride knew of it, but I was in ignorance. Her father, Jervis Langdon, had bought and furnished a new house for us in the fashionable street, Delaware Avenue, and had laid in a cook and housemaids, and a brisk and electric young coachman, an Irishman, Patrick McAleer, and we were being driven all over that city in order that one sleighful of those people could have time to go to the house, and see that the gas was lighted all over it, and a hot supper prepared for the crowd. We arrived at last, and when I entered that fairy place my indignation reached high water mark, And without any reserve, I delivered my opinion to that friend of mine for being so stupid as to put us into a boarding house whose terms would be far out of my reach. Then Mr. Langdon brought forward a very pretty box and opened it, and took from it a deed of the house. So the comedy ended very pleasantly, and we sat down to supper. The company departed about midnight and left us alone in our new quarters. Then Ellen, the cook, came in to get orders for the morning's marketing, and neither of us knew whether beefsteak was sold by the barrel or by the yard. We exposed our ignorance, and Ellen was full of Irish delight over it. Patrick McAleer, that brisk young Irishman, came in to get his orders for next day, and that was our first glimpse of him. Our first child, Langdon Clemens, was born the 7th of November, 1870, and lived 22 months. Sussy was born the 19th of March, 1872, and passed from life in the Hartford home, the 18th of August, 1896. With her, when the end came, were Jean and Katie Leary, and John and Ellen, the gardener and his wife. Clara and her mother and I arrived in England from around the world on the 31st of July, and took a house in Guildford. A week later, when Sussy, Katie, and Jean should have been arriving from America, we got a letter instead. Explained that Sussy was slightly ill, nothing of consequence, but we were disquieted and began to cable for later news. This was Friday. All day no answer, and the ship to leave Southampton next day at noon. Clara and her mother began packing to be ready in case the news should be bad. Finally came a cablegram saying, "Wait for cablegram in the morning." This was not satisfactory, not reassuring. I cabled again, asking that the answer be sent to Southampton, for the day was now closing. I waited in the post office that night till the doors were closed, toward midnight, in the hope that good news might still come, but there was no message. We sat silent at home till 1 in the morning, waiting for we knew not what. Then we took the earliest morning train, and when we reached Southampton, the message was there. It said the recovery would be long, but certain. This was a great relief to me, but not to my wife. She was frightened. She and Clara went aboard the steamer at once and sailed for America, to nurse Sussy. I remained behind to search for a larger house in Guildford. That was the 15th of August, 1896. 3 days later, when my wife and Clara were about halfway across the ocean, I was standing in our dining room thinking of nothing in particular, when a cablegram was put into my hand. It said, "Sussy was peacefully released today." It is one of the mysteries of our nature that a man, all unprepared, can receive a thunderstroke like that and live. There is but one reasonable explanation of it. The intellect is stunned by the shock, and but gropingly gathers the meaning of the words. The power to realize their full import is mercifully wanting. The mind has a dumb sense of vast loss, that is all. It will take mind and memory months and possibly years to gather together the details and thus learn and know the whole extent of the loss. A man's house burns down. The smoking wreckage represents only a ruined home that was dear through years of use and pleasant associations. By and by, as the days and weeks go on, first he misses this, then that, then the other thing. And when he casts about for it, he finds that it was in that house. Always it is an essential, there was but one of its kind. It cannot be replaced. It was in that house. It is irrevocably lost. He did not realize that it was an essential when he had it. He only discovers it now when he finds himself balked, hampered by its absence. It will be years before the tale of lost essentials is complete, and not till then can he truly know the magnitude of his disaster. The 18th of August brought me the awful tidings. The mother and the sister were out there in mid-Atlantic, ignorant of what was happening, flying to meet this incredible calamity. All that could be done to protect them from the full force of the shock was done by relatives and good friends. They went down the bay and met the ship at night, but did not show themselves until morning, and then only to Clara. When she returned to the stateroom, she did not speak, and did not need to. Her mother looked at her and said, "Sussy is dead." At 10:30 that night, Clara and her mother completed their circuit of the globe, and drew up at Elmira by the same train and in the same car which had borne them and me westward from it 1 year, 1 month, and 1 week before. And again Sussy was there, not waving her welcome in the glare of the lights, as she had waved her farewell to us 13 months before, but lying white and fair in her coffin, in the house where she was born. The last 13 days of Sussy's life were spent in our own house in Hartford, the home of her childhood, and always the dearest place in the earth to her. About her she had faithful old friends, her pastor, Mr. Twitchell, who had known her from the cradle, and who had come a long journey to be with her, her uncle and aunt, Mr. and Mrs. Theodore Crane, Patrick, the coachman, Katie, who had begun to serve us when Sussy was a child of 8 years, John and Ellen, who had been with us many years. Also Jean was there. At the hour when my wife and Clara set sail for America, Sussy was in no danger. 3 hours later, there came a sudden change for the worse. Meningitis set in, and it was immediately apparent that she was death-struck. That was Saturday, the 15th of August. That evening, she took food for the last time. Jean's letter to me. The next morning, the brain fever was raging. She walked the floor a little in her pain and delirium, then succumbed to weakness and returned to her bed. Previously, she had found hanging in a closet a gown which she had seen her mother wear. She thought it was her mother, dead, and she kissed it and cried. About noon, she became blind, an effect of the disease, and bewailed it to her uncle. From Jean's letter, I take this sentence, which needs no comment. About 1 in the afternoon, Sussy spoke for the last time. It was only one word that she said when she spoke that last time, and it told of her longing. She groped with her hands and found Katie, and caressed her face and said, "Mama." How gracious it was that, in that forlorn hour of wreck and ruin, with the night of death closing around her, she should have been granted that beautiful illusion. That the latest vision which rested upon the clouded mirror of her mind should have been the vision of her mother, and the latest emotion she should know in life, the joy and peace of that dear imagined presence. About 2 o'clock, she composed herself as if for sleep and never moved again. She fell into unconsciousness and so remained 2 days and 5 hours, until Tuesday evening at 7 minutes past 7, when the release came. She was 24 years and 5 months old. On the 23d, her mother and her sisters saw her laid to rest, she that had been our wonder and our worship. In one of her own books, I find some verses which I will copy here. Apparently, she always put borrowed matter in quotation marks. These verses lack those marks, and therefore I take them to be her own. Love came at dawn, when all the world was fair, when crimson glories bloom and sun were rife. Love came at dawn, when hope's wings fanned the air, and murmured, "I am life." Love came at eve, and when the day was done, when heart and brain were tired and slumber pressed. Love came at eve, shut out the sinking sun, and whispered, "I am rest." The summer seasons of Sussy's childhood were spent at Quarry Farm, on the hills east of Elmira, New York. The other seasons of the year at the home in Hartford. Like other children, she was blithe and happy, fond of play. Unlike the average of children, she was at times much given to retiring within herself, and trying to search out the hidden meanings of the deep things that make the puzzle and pathos of human existence, and in all the ages, have baffled the inquirer and mocked him. As a little child aged 7, she was oppressed and perplexed by the maddening repetition of the stock incidents of our race's fleeting sojourn here, just as the same thing has oppressed and perplexed maturer minds from the beginning of time. A myriad of men are born, they labor and sweat and struggle for bread, they squabble and scold and fight, they scramble for little mean advantages over each other. Age creeps upon them. Infirmities follow. Shames and humiliations bring down their prides and their vanities. Those they love are taken from them, and the joy of life is turned to aching grief. The burden of pain, care, misery grows heavier year by year. At length, ambition is dead, pride is dead, vanity is dead, longing for release is in their place. It comes at last, the only unpoisoned gift earth ever had for them, and they vanish from a world where they were of no consequence, where they achieved nothing, where they were a mistake and a failure and a foolishness. There they have left no sign that they have existed, a world which will lament them a day and forget them forever. Then another myriad takes their place, and copies all they did, and goes along the same profitless road, and vanishes as they vanished, to make room for another, and a million other myriads, to follow the same arid path through the same desert, and accomplish what the first myriad, and all the myriads that came after it, accomplished: nothing. "Mama, what is it all for?" asked Sussy, preliminarily stating the above details in her own halting language, after long brooding over them alone in the privacy of the nursery. A year later, she was groping her way alone through another sunless bog, but this time she reached a rest for her feet. For a week, her mother had not been able to go to the nursery, evenings, at the child's prayer hour. She spoke of it, was sorry for it, and said she would come tonight, and hoped she could continue to come every night and hear Sussy pray, as before. Noticing that the child wished to respond, but was evidently troubled as to how to word her answer, she asked what the difficulty was. Sussy explained that Miss Foote, the governess, had been teaching her about the Indians and their religious beliefs, whereby it appeared that they had not only a god but several. This had set Sussy to thinking. As a result of this thinking, she had stopped praying. She qualified this statement, that is, she modified it, saying she did not now pray in the same way as she had formerly done. Her mother said, "Tell me about it, dear." Well, Mama, the Indians believed they knew, but now we know they were wrong. By and by, it can turn out that we are wrong. So now I only pray that there may be a God and a heaven or something better. I wrote down this pathetic prayer in its precise wording. At the time, in a record which we kept of the children's sayings, and my reverence for it has grown with the years that have passed over my head since then. Its untaught grace and simplicity are a child's, but the wisdom and the pathos of it are of all the ages that have come and gone since the race of man has lived, and longed, and hoped, and feared, and doubted. To go back a year, Sussy aged 7, several times her mother said to her, There, Sussy, you mustn't cry over little things. This furnished Sussy a text for thought she had been breaking her heart over what had seemed vast disasters. A broken toy. A picnic cancelled by thunder and lightning and rain. The mouse that was growing tame and friendly in the nursery caught and killed by the cat. And now came this strange revelation. For some unaccountable reason, these were not vast calamities. Why? How is the size of calamities measured? What is the rule? There must be some way to tell the great ones from the small ones. What is the law of these proportions? She examined the problem earnestly and long. She gave it her best thought from time to time, for 2 or 3 days, but it baffled her, defeated her. And at last she gave up and went to her mother for help. Mama, what is little things? It seemed a simple question at first. And yet, before the answer could be put into words, unsuspected and unforeseen difficulties began to appear. They increased, they multiplied, they brought about another defeat. The effort to explain came to a standstill. Then Sussy tried to help her mother out with an instance, an example, an illustration. The mother was getting ready to go downtown, and one of her errands was to buy a long-promised toy watch for Sussy. If you forgot the watch, Mama, would that be a little thing? She was not concerned about the watch, for she knew it would not be forgotten. What she was hoping for was that the answer would unriddle the riddle and bring rest and peace to her perplexed little mind. The hope was disappointed, of course, for the reason that the size of a misfortune is not determinate by an outsider's measurement of it, but only by the measurements applied to it by the person specially affected by it. The king's lost crown is a vast matter to the king, but of no consequence to the child. The lost toy is a great matter to the child, but in the king's eyes it is not a thing to break the heart about. A verdict was reached, but it was based upon the above model, and Sussy was granted leave to measure her disasters thereafter with her own tape line. As a child, Sussy had a passionate temper, and it cost her much remorse and many tears before she learned to govern it, but after that it was a wholesome salt, and her character was the stronger and healthier for its presence. It enabled her to be good with dignity. It preserved her not only from being good for vanity's sake, but from even the appearance of it. In looking back over the long vanished years, it seems but natural and excusable that I should dwell with longing affection and preference upon incidents of her young life which made it beautiful to us, and that I should let its few small offenses go unsummoned and unreproached. In the summer of 1880, when Sussy was just 8 years of age, the family were at Quarry Farm, as usual at that season of the year. Hay-cutting time was approaching, and Sussy and Clara were counting the hours, for the time was big with a great event for them. They had been promised that they might mount the wagon and ride home from the fields on the summit of the Hay Mountain. This perilous privilege, so dear to their age and species, had never been granted them before. Their excitement had no bounds. They could talk of nothing but this epic-making adventure now. But misfortune overtook Sussy on the very morning of the important day. In a sudden outbreak of passion, she corrected Clara with a shovel or stick or something of the sort. At any rate, the offense committed was of a gravity clearly beyond the limit allowed in the nursery. In accordance with the rule and custom of the house, Sussy went to her mother to confess, and to help decide upon the size and character of the punishment due. It was quite understood that, as a punishment could have but one rational object and function, to act as a reminder, and warn the transgressor against transgressing in the same way again, the children would know about as well as any how to choose a penalty which would be rememberable and effective. Sussy and her mother discussed various punishments, but none of them seemed adequate. This fault was an unusually serious one, and required the setting up of a danger signal in the memory that would not blow out nor burn out, but remain a fixture there, and furnish its saving warning indefinitely. Among the punishments mentioned was deprivation of the hay wagon ride. It was noticeable that this one hit Sussy hard. Finally, in the summing up, the mother named over the list and asked, "Which one do you think it ought to be, Sussy?" Sussy studied, shrank from her duty, and asked, "Which do you think, Mamma?" "Well, Sussy, I would rather leave it to you. You make the choice yourself." It cost Sussy a struggle, and much and deep thinking and weighing, but she came out where anyone who knew her could have foretold she would. Well, Mama, I'll make it the hay wagon, because you know the other things might not make me remember not to do it again. But if I don't get to ride on the hay wagon, I can remember it easily. In this world, the real penalty, the sharp one, the lasting one, never falls otherwise than on the wrong person. It was not I that corrected Clara, but the remembrance of poor Sussy's lost hayride still brings me a pang, after 26 years. Apparently, Sussy was born with humane feelings for the animals and compassion for their troubles. This enabled her to see a new point in an old story, once, when she was only 6 years old, a point which had been overlooked by older, and perhaps duller, people for many ages. Her mother told her the moving story of the sale of Joseph by his brethren, the staining of his coat with the blood of the slaughtered kid, and the rest of it. She dwelt upon the inhumanity of the brothers, their cruelty toward their helpless young brother, and the unbrotherly treachery which they practiced upon him, for she hoped to teach the child a lesson in gentle pity and mercifulness which she would remember. Apparently, her desire was accomplished, for the tears came into Sussy's eyes and she was deeply moved. Then she said, "Poor little kid." A child's frank envy of the privileges and distinctions of its elders is often a delicately flattering attention and the reverse of unwelcome. But sometimes the envy is not placed where the beneficiary is expecting it to be placed. Once, when Sussy was 7, she sat breathlessly absorbed in watching a guest of ours adorn herself for a ball. The lady was charmed by this homage, this mute and gentle admiration, and was happy in it. And when her pretty labors were finished, and she stood at last perfect, unimprovable, clothed like Solomon in all his glory, she paused, confident and expectant, to receive from Sussy's tongue the tribute that was burning in her eyes. Sussy drew an envious little sigh and said, "I wish I could have crooked teeth and spectacles." Once, when Sussy was 6 months along in her 8th year, she did something one day in the presence of company, which subjected her to criticism and reproof. Afterward, when she was alone with her mother, as was her custom, she reflected a little while over the matter. Then she set up what I think, and what the shade of Burns would think, was a quite good philosophical defense. "Well, Mama, you know I didn't see myself, and so I couldn't know how it looked. In homes where the near friends and visitors are mainly literary people, lawyers, judges, professors, and clergymen, the children's ears become early familiarized with wide vocabularies. It is natural for them to pick up any words that fall in their way. It is natural for them to pick up big and little ones indiscriminately. It is natural for them to use without fear any word that comes to their net, no matter how formidable it may be as to size. As a result, their talk is a curious and funny musketry clatter of little words, interrupted at intervals by the heavy artillery crash of a word of such imposing sound and size that it seems to shake the ground and rattle the windows. Sometimes the child gets a wrong idea of a word which it has picked up by chance and attaches to it a meaning which impairs its usefulness. But this does not happen as often as one might expect it would. Indeed, it happens with an infrequency which may be regarded as remarkable. As a child, Sussy had good fortune with her large words, and she employed many of them. She made no more than her fair share of mistakes. Once when she thought something very funny was going to happen, but it didn't, she was racked and torn with laughter by anticipation. But apparently she still felt sure of her position, for she said, "If it had happened, I should have been transformed with glee." And earlier, when she was a little maid of 5 years, she informed a visitor that she had been in a church only once, and that was the time when Clara was crucified. In Heidelberg, when Sussy was 6, she noticed that the Schloss gardens were populous with snails creeping all about everywhere. One day she found a new dish on her table and inquired concerning it, and learned that it was made of snails. She was awed and impressed, and said, "Wild ones, Mamma." She was thoughtful and considerate of others, an acquired quality, no doubt. No one seems to be born with it. One hot day, at home in Hartford when she was a little child, her mother borrowed her fan several times, a Japanese one, value 5 cents, refreshed herself with it a moment or two, then handed it back with a word of thanks. Sussy knew her mother would use the fan all the time if she could do it without putting a deprivation upon its owner. She also knew that her mother could not be persuaded to do that. A relief must be devised somehow. Sussy devised it. She got 5 cents out of her money box and carried it to Patrick, and asked him to take it downtown, a mile and a half, and buy a Japanese fan and bring it home. He did it, and thus thoughtfully and delicately was the exigency met, and the mother's comfort secured. It is to the child's credit that she did not save herself expense by bringing down another and more costly kind of fan from upstairs, but was content to act upon the impression that her mother desired the Japanese kind, content to accomplish the desire and stop with that, without troubling about the wisdom or unwisdom of it. Sometimes, while she was still a child, her speech fell into quaint and strikingly expressive forms. Once, aged 9 or 10, she came to her mother's room when her sister Jean was a baby and said Jean was crying in the nursery and asked if she might ring for the nurse. Her mother asked, "Is she crying hard, meaning cross, ugly?" "Well, no, Mamma, it is a weary, lonesome cry." It is a pleasure to me to recall various incidents which reveal the delicacies of feeling that were so considerable a part of her budding character. Such a revelation came once in a way which, while creditable to her heart, was defective in another direction. She was in her 11th year then. Her mother had been making the Christmas purchases, and she allowed Sussy to see the presents which were for Patrick's children. Among these was a handsome sled for Jimmy, on which a stag was painted, also in gilt capitals the word deer. Sussy was excited and joyous over everything until she came to this sled. Then she became sober and silent, yet the sled was the choicest of all the gifts. Her mother was surprised and also disappointed and said, "Why, Sussy, doesn't it please you? Isn't it fine?" Sussy hesitated, and it was plain that she did not want to say the thing that was in her mind. However, being urged, she brought it haltingly out. "Well, Mamma, it is fine, and of course it did cost a good deal, but, why should that be mentioned?" Seeing that she was not understood, she reluctantly pointed to that word dear. It was her orthography that was at fault, not her heart. She had inherited both from her mother. Mark Twain. To be continued. North American Review. Number DCI. October 19, 1906. Chapters from My Autobiography, Roman 4. By Mark Twain. When Sussy was 13, and was a slender little maid with plaited tails of copper-tinged brown hair down her back, and was perhaps the busiest bee in the household hive, by reason of the manifold studies, health exercises and recreations she had to attend to, she secretly, and of her own motion, and out of love, added another task to her labors, the writing of a biography of me. She did this work in her bedroom at night and kept her record hidden. After a little, the mother discovered it and filched it, and let me see it, then told Sussy what she had done, and how pleased I was and how proud. I remember that time with a deep pleasure. I had had compliments before, but none that touched me like this, none that could approach it for value in my eyes. It has kept that place always since. I have had no compliment, no praise, no tribute from any source that was so precious to me as this one was and still is. As I read it now, after all these many years, it is still a king's message to me, and brings me the same dear surprise it brought me then, with the pathos added, of the thought that the eager and hasty hand that sketched it and scrawled it will not touch mine again. And I feel as the humble and unexpectant must feel when their eyes fall upon the edict that raises them to the ranks of the noble. Yesterday, while I was rummaging in a pile of ancient notebooks of mine, which I had not seen for years, I came across a reference to that biography. It is quite evident that several times, at breakfast and dinner, in those long past days, I was posing for the biography. In fact, I clearly remember that I was doing that, and I also remember that Sussy detected it. I remember saying a very smart thing, with a good deal of an air, at the breakfast table one morning, and that Sussy observed to her mother privately, a little later, that Papa was doing that for the biography. I cannot bring myself to change any line or word in Sussy's sketch of me, but will introduce passages from it now, and then just as they came in their quaint simplicity out of her honest heart, which was the beautiful heart of a child. What comes from that source has a charm and grace of its own which may transgress all the recognized laws of literature, if it choose, and yet be literature still, and worthy of hospitality. I shall print the whole of this little biography, before I have done with it, every word, every sentence. The spelling is frequently desperate, but it was Sussy's, and it shall stand. I love it and cannot profane it. To me it is gold. To correct it would alloy it, not refine it, it would spoil it. It would take from it its freedom and flexibility and make it stiff and formal. Even when it is most extravagant, I am not shocked. It is Sussy's spelling, and she was doing the best she could, and nothing could better it for me. Sussy began the biography in 1885, when I was in the 50th year of my age, and she just entering the 14th of hers. She begins in this way. We are a very happy family. We consist of Papa, Mama, Jean, Clara, and me. It is Papa I am writing about, and I shall have no trouble in not knowing what to say about him, as he is a very striking character. But wait a minute, I will return to Sussy presently. In the matter of slavish imitation, man is the monkey's superior all the time. The average man is destitute of independence of opinion. He is not interested in contriving an opinion of his own, by study and reflection, but is only anxious to find out what his neighbor's opinion is and slavishly adopt it. A generation ago, I found out that the latest review of a book was pretty sure to be just a reflection of the earliest review of it, that whatever the first reviewer found to praise or censure in the book would be repeated in the latest reviewer's report, with nothing fresh added. Therefore, more than once I took the precaution of sending my book, in manuscript, to Mr. Howells when he was editor of the Atlantic Monthly, so that he could prepare a review of it at leisure. I knew he would say the truth about the book. I also knew that he would find more merit than demerit in it, because I already knew that that was the condition of the book. I allowed no copy of it to go out to the press until after Mr. Howells's notice of it had appeared. That book was always safe. There wasn't a man behind a pen in all America that had the courage to find anything in the book which Mr. Howells had not found. There wasn't a man behind a pen in America that had spirit enough to say a brave and original thing about the book on his own responsibility. I believe that the trade of critic in literature, music, and the drama is the most degraded of all trades, and that it has no real value, certainly no large value. When Charles Dudley Warner and I were about to bring out The Gilded Age, the editor of the Daily Graphic persuaded me to let him have an advance copy, he giving me his word of honor that no notice of it would appear in his paper until after the Atlantic Monthly notice should have appeared. This reptile published a review of the book within 3 days afterward. I could not really complain, because he had only given me his word of honor as security. I ought to have required of him something substantial. I believe his notice did not deal mainly with the merit of the book, or the lack of it, but with my moral attitude toward the public. It was charged that I had used my reputation to play a swindle upon the public, that Mr. Warner had written as much as half of the book, and that I had used my name to float it and give it currency. A currency, so the critic averred, which it could not have acquired without my name, and that this conduct of mine was a grave fraud upon the people. The Graphic was not an authority upon any subject whatever. It had a sort of distinction, in that it was the first and only illustrated daily newspaper that the world had seen, but it was without character. It was poorly and cheaply edited. Its opinion of a book or of any other work of art was of no consequence. Everybody knew this, yet all the critics in America, one after the other, copied the Graphic's criticism, merely changing the phraseology, and left me under that charge of dishonest conduct. Even the great Chicago Tribune, the most important journal in the Middle West, was not able to invent anything fresh, but adopted the view of the humble Daily Graphic, dishonesty charge and all. However, let it go. It is the will of God that we must have critics and missionaries and congressmen and humorists, and we must bear the burden. Meantime, I seem to have been drifting into criticism myself. But that is nothing. At the worst, criticism is nothing more than a crime, and I am not unused to that. What I have been traveling toward all this time is this. The first critic that ever had occasion to describe my personal appearance littered his description with foolish and inexcusable errors, whose aggregate furnished the result that I was distinctly and distressingly unhandsome. That description floated around the country in the papers, and was in constant use and wear for a quarter of a century. It seems strange to me that apparently no critic in the country could be found who could look at me and have the courage to take up his pen and destroy that lie. That lie began its course on the Pacific coast in 1864, and it likened me in personal appearance to Petroleum V. Nasby, who had been out there lecturing. For 25 years afterward, no critic could furnish a description of me without fetching in Nasby to help out my portrait. I knew Nasby well, and he was a good fellow, but in my life I have not felt malignant enough about any more than 3 persons to charge those persons with resembling Nasby. It hurts me to the heart. I was always handsome. Anybody but a critic could have seen it, and it had long been a distress to my family, including Sussy, that the critics should go on making this wearisome mistake, year after year, when there was no foundation for it. Even when a critic wanted to be particularly friendly and complimentary to me, he didn't dare to go beyond my clothes. He never ventured beyond that old safe frontier. When he had finished with my clothes, he had said all the kind things, the pleasant things, the complimentary things he could risk. Then he dropped back on Nasby. Yesterday, I found this clipping in the pocket of one of those ancient memorandum books of mine. It is of the date of 39 years ago, and both the paper and the ink are yellow with the bitterness that I felt in that old day when I clipped it out to preserve it and brood over it and grieve about it. I will copy it here, to wit. A correspondent of the Philadelphia Press, writing of one of Schuyler Colfax's receptions, says of our Washington correspondent, Mark Twain, the delicate humorist, was present, quite a lion as he deserves to be. Mark is a bachelor, faultless in taste, whose snowy vest is suggestive of endless quarrels with Washington washerwomen. But the heroism of Mark is settled for all time, for such purity and smoothness were never seen before. His lavender gloves might have been stolen from some Turkish harem, so delicate were they in size, but more likely, anything else were more likely than that. In form and feature he bears some resemblance to the immortal Nasby, but whilst petroleum is brunette to the core, Twain is golden, amber-hued, melting, blonde. Let us return to Sussie's biography now, and get the opinion of one who is unbiased. From Sussie's biography, Papa's appearance has been described many times but very incorrectly. He has beautiful gray hair, not any too thick or any too long, but just right, a Roman nose which greatly improves the beauty of his features, kind blue eyes, and a small mustache. He has a wonderfully shaped head and profile. He has a very good figure. In short, he is an extraordinarily fine-looking man. All his features are perfect, except that he has an extraordinary teeth. His complexion is very fair, and he doesn't wear a beard. He is a very good man and a very funny one. He has got a temper, but we all of us have in this family. He is the loveliest man I ever saw or ever hoped to see, and oh, so absent-minded. He does tell perfectly delightful stories. Clara and I used to sit on each arm of his chair and listen while he told us stories about the pictures on the wall. I remember the storytelling days vividly. They were a difficult and exacting audience, those little creatures. Along one side of the library in the Hartford home, the bookshelves joined the mantelpiece. In fact, there were shelves on both sides of the mantelpiece. On these shelves and on the mantelpiece stood various ornaments. At one end of the procession was a framed oil painting of a cat's head. At the other end was a head of a beautiful young girl, life-size, called Emmeline because she looked just about like that, an impressionist watercolor. Between the one picture and the other there were 12 or 15 of the bric-a-brac things already mentioned. Also an old painting by Elihu Vedder, the young Medusa. Every now and then the children required me to construct a romance, always impromptu, not a moment's preparation permitted, and into that romance I had to get all that bric-a-brac and the three pictures. I had to start always with the cat and finish with Emmeline. I was never allowed the refreshment of a change, end for end. It was not permissible to introduce a bric-a-brac ornament into the story out of its place in the procession. These bric-a-bracs were never allowed a peaceful day, a reposeful day, a restful Sabbath. In their lives there was no Sabbath, in their lives there was no peace. They knew no existence but a monotonous career of violence and bloodshed. In the course of time, the bric-a-brac and the pictures showed where. It was because they had had so many and such tumultuous adventures in their romantic careers. As romancer to the children, I had a hard time, even from the beginning. If they brought me a picture, in a magazine, and required me to build a story to it, they would cover the rest of the page with their pudgy hands to keep me from stealing an idea from it. The stories had to come hot from the bat, always. They had to be absolutely original and fresh. Sometimes the children furnished me simply a character or two, or a dozen, and required me to start out at once on that slim basis and deliver those characters up to a vigorous and entertaining life of crime. If they heard of a new trade, or an unfamiliar animal, or anything like that, I was pretty sure to have to deal with those things in the next romance. Once Clara required me to build a sudden tale out of a plumber and a boa constrictor, and I had to do it. She didn't know what a boa constrictor was until he developed in the tale, then she was better satisfied with it than ever. From Sussie's biography, Papa's favorite game is billiards, and when he is tired and wishes to rest himself, he stays up all night and plays billiards. It seems to rest his head. He smokes a great deal almost incessantly. He has the mind of an author exactly, some of the simplest things he can't understand. Our burglar alarm is often out of order, and Papa had been obliged to take the mahogany room off from the alarm altogether for a time, because the burglar alarm had been in the habit of ringing even when the mahogany room was closed. At length he thought that perhaps the burglar alarm might be in order, and he decided to try and see. Accordingly, he put it on and then went down and opened the window. Consequently, the alarm bell rang. It would even if the alarm had been in order. Papa went despairingly upstairs and said to Mama, "Livy, the mahogany room won't go on." I have just opened the window to see. Why, youth? Mama replied, if you've opened the window, why, of course the alarm will ring. That's what I've opened it for, why I just went down to see if it would ring. Mama tried to explain to Papa that, when he wanted to go and see whether the alarm would ring, while the window was closed, he mustn't go and open the window. But in vain, Papa couldn't understand, and got very impatient with Mama for trying to make him believe an impossible thing true. This is a frank biographer and an honest one. She uses no sandpaper on me. I have, to this day, the same dull head in the matter of conundrums and perplexities which Sussy had discovered in those long-gone days. Complexities annoy me, they irritate me, then this progressive feeling presently warms into anger. I cannot get far in the reading of the commonest and simplest contract, with its parties of the first part, and parties of the second part, and parties of the third part, before my temper is all gone. Ashcroft comes up here every day and pathetically tries to make me understand the points of the lawsuit which we are conducting against Henry Butters, Harold Wheeler, and the rest of those Plasmon buccaneers, but daily he has to give it up. It is pitiful to see, when he bends his earnest and appealing eyes upon me and says, after one of his efforts, now you do understand that, don't you? I am always obliged to say, I don't, Ashcroft. I wish I could understand it, but I don't. Send for the cat. In the days which Sussy is talking about, a perplexity fell to my lot one day. F.G. Whitmore was my business agent, and he brought me out from town in his buggy. We drove by the portcotcher and toward the stable. Now this was a single road, and was like a spoon whose handle stretched from the gate to a great round flower bed in the neighborhood of the stable. At the approach to the flower bed, the road divided and circumnavigated it, making a loop, which I have likened to the bowl of the spoon. As we neared the loop, I saw that Whitmore was laying his course to port. I was sitting on the starboard side, the side the house was on, and was going to start around that spoon bowl on that left-hand side. I said, "Don't do that, Whitmore. Take the right-hand side. Then I shall be next to the house when we get to the door." He said, "That will not happen in any case. It doesn't make any difference which way I go around this flower bed." I explained to him that he was an ass, but he stuck to his proposition, and I said, "Go on and try it and see." He went on and tried it, and sure enough he fetched me up at the door on the very side that he had said I would be. I was not able to believe it then, and I don't believe it yet. I said, "Whitmore, that is merely an accident. You can't do it again." He said he could, and he drove down into the street, fetched around, came back, and actually did it again. I was stupefied, paralyzed, petrified with these strange results, but they did not convince me. I didn't believe he could do it another time, but he did. He said he could do it all day and fetch up the same way every time. By that time my temper was gone, and I asked him to go home and apply to the asylum, and I would pay the expenses. I didn't want to see him any more for a week. I went upstairs in a rage and started to tell Livy about it, expecting to get her sympathy for me and to breed aversion in her for Whitmore. But she merely burst into peal after peal of laughter, as the tale of my adventure went on, for her head was like Sussy's. Riddles and complexities had no terrors for it. Her mind and Sussy's were analytical. I have tried to make it appear that mine was different. Many and many a time, I have told that buggy experiment, hoping against hope that I would some time or other find somebody who would be on my side, but it has never happened, and I am never able to go glibly forward and state the circumstances of that buggy's progress without having to halt and consider, and call up in my mind the spoon handle, the bowl of the spoon, the buggy and the horse, and my position in the buggy. And the minute I have got that far and tried to turn it to the left, it goes to ruin. I can't see how it is ever going to fetch me out right when we get to the door. Sussy is right in her estimate. I can't understand things. That burglar alarm which Sussy mentions led a gay and careless life, and had no principles. It was generally out of order at one point or another, and there was plenty of opportunity, because all the windows and doors in the house, from the cellar up to the top floor, were connected with it. However, in its seasons of being out of order, it could trouble us for only a very little while. We quickly found out that it was fooling us, and that it was buzzing its blood-curdling alarm merely for its own amusement. Then we would shut it off and send to New York for the electrician, there not being one in all Hartford in those days. When the repairs were finished, we would set the alarm again and re-establish our confidence in it. It never did any real business except upon one single occasion. All the rest of its expensive career was frivolous and without purpose. Just that one time it performed its duty, and its whole duty, gravely, seriously, admirably. It let fly about 2 o'clock one black and dreary March morning, and I turned out promptly, because I knew that it was not fooling this time. The bathroom door was on my side of the bed. I stepped in there, turned up the gas, looked at the annunciator, and turned off the alarm, so far as the door indicated was concerned, thus stopping the racket. Then I came back to bed. Mrs. Clemens opened the debate. What was it? It was the cellar door. Was it a burglar, do you think? Yes, I said, of course it was. Did you suppose it was a Sunday school superintendent? No, what do you suppose he wants? I suppose he wants jewelry, but he is not acquainted with the house and he thinks it is in the cellar. I don't like to disappoint a burglar whom I am not acquainted with, and who has done me no harm, but if he had had common sagacity enough to inquire, I could have told him we kept nothing down there but coal and vegetables. Still, it may be that he is acquainted with the place, and that what he really wants is coal and vegetables. On the whole, I think it is vegetables he is after.